Hello there everybody and welcome to the Talking City podcast brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. My name is Dan Murphy and joining me today as ever is Mr. Joe Bray. Joe, how is it going?
Not too bad, thanks Dan. It's been a nice busy day watching City training and now talking to you. Can't get better than that, can it?
Of course, we want to keep the days active, keep them different and make them go so much quicker and gladly and thankfully we've got quite a lot to talk about because as it's, I think in the years gone by, I think we couldn't get called too much for saying City have gotten a bit boring, the relentless winning streaks they've gone on and whatnot, while the football, of course, has been beautiful and breathtaking at times. The unstoppable machine can sometimes get a bit dull, but not the case this year by a long stretch, because Saturday's match brought with it much drama, many talking points, and, of course, City failed to kind of go on another winning run. Of course, they drew 1-1 with Nottingham Forest in Nottingham. You were there, Joe, and I suppose the biggest question of all is how on God's green did City not win that game?
Well, this is it. It's one step forward with the win at Arsenal and then a step back with the draw at Nottingham Forest, and it felt like a cup tie when sort of the arrivals and we were watching the players walk into the ground and you've got Nottingham Forest fans shouting the names of City players and Jack Grealish stopped for autographs before the game, and it felt like these Forest fans were just there to see their own team in the same stadium as one of the best teams in the world, and their fans were up for it as you would expect, and it was a good atmosphere, but some of the chants were just a bit pantomime, if you like, booing Jack Grealish and, having to go at Pep Guardiola's trainers, and it felt like all City needed to do was just actually play football and get on the ball and a goal would silence them, but it didn't happen. Well, it happened in the sense that Bernardo Silva got a very, very good goal, lashed the ball over Keylor Navas to give City the lead, and it went in at half time and we were thinking it's 1-0, but it could be maybe 2 or 3. City have got in behind so often but just haven't been able to get that cutting edge, and as the game wore on, City missed more chances, and honestly if it had finished 5-0, 5-1 to City, nobody would have batted an eyelid because they were that dominant. But the more chances they miss when Phil Foden goes through and falls over his own feet because he can't decide whether to shoot or play in Erling Haaland, you start to think, well, they've got to start scoring one of these at some point. And when Erling Haaland blazed the ball over the bar, me and Simon turned to each other and said that was worse than his Community Shield miss, where everybody blamed, everyone said he wasn't going to cut it in England. You just sort of started to think maybe we shouldn't be writing what we're writing, which is City are doing well and they're going to win. Maybe we should temper it a bit, and true to what we feared, in the sense of having to rewrite our pieces, Nottingham Forest scored, and it was a good breakaway goal. It was onside despite a VAR check, and when I say it was a cup tie at the start, it definitely felt like a cup tie at the end. There were fireworks going off. We could hear it outside the City ground, and it was a very interesting game to watch and see. But as you said in the introduction, how City did not win that game is beyond anyone.
Well, it was such a peculiar but yet oddly familiar game, I thought. To me, it kind of felt, why you say cup tie, it kind of had that inevitable feel of more the Champions League matches City have had in recent years, those shocking knockouts we've seen, your Monacos, your Lyons and the like, when your City was so utterly dominant and in control and somehow throw it away. I don't think it was quite as self-destructive in the sense they didn't really make any defensive mistakes in this game. It was more just not finishing the chances. But that same sort of creeping feeling you couldn't shake, as you say, around maybe the 55th minute, the hour mark, when you could just feel, I think, every fan watching, every person tweeting, me doing the blog, you doing your reports, I'm sure everyone just felt like, it's going to be one. I think the commentator was the exact same, like, it's coming, you just know it is. It's all just inevitable that the equaliser was going to come, and it duly did. I mean, I was kind of keeping an eye on the stats during the game, and in that first half, I want to say maybe at the 20-minute mark, maybe the halfway mark of the first half, 22 minutes or so, City literally had 91% possession at one point, which is absolutely absurd. I think they ended the half with 86 in total. I think they actually ended the game with 73, which is still a ridiculously high number. Just kind of looking at the stats in general, you've got 23 shots to 4, 6 on target, which is its own story, and we'll get on to 2-1. More than double the amount of passes, etc. So on. It's the same old story, and they just didn't kind of get the job done. But I think we should maybe talk about the little good that we did have first before we get on to all those missed chances, and that is, at least the performance itself was good. It doesn't feel as much of a disaster, even though there was very missed chances. And another assist for Jack Grealish, and as you say, a great goal for Bernardo.
Yeah, and I mean that's what Guardiola pointed to after the game. He was disappointed not to win the game, but when you create so many chances, it feels like quite an easy solution to fix. On another day, Erling Haaland will smash the ball into the back of the net from 5 yards out, and Phil Foden will find the back of the net. And yes, it's disappointing, but you can see very clearly where City went wrong, and it feels like it shouldn't really happen again. And it's an easy solution to solve. Yeah, Bernardo did his left back role again, where it was a back three. In possession, he was a midfielder. Out of possession, he was the left back. Now at Arsenal, City had, was it 36% possession, one of the lowest, if not the lowest, under Guardiola in the Premier League. So he did a lot of playing out left back against a player like Bukayo Saka. But as you say, City had a lot more of the ball at Nottingham Forest. So he was essentially another midfielder. His goal was very good. He was involved quite a lot. This was sort of the performance that I would expect City would want to play him in if they're going to do that sort of dual role as covering left back but a midfielder, when they expect to have a lot of the ball. But Nottingham Forest did get their goal on that side. They sort of exploited the weakness of having Bernardo as not a natural left back. He spoke about that, didn't he? He said he's got to tune his brain so it's more defensive rather than attacking, and it seemed like that was Nottingham Forest's game plan. And it was really interesting to hear Steve Cooper talk after it. I think we'll touch on that later. But in terms, if we carry on with the positives, Jack Grealish good again. Phil Foden came back and created chance after chance. If it wasn't for that sort of stutter in front of goal, he would have probably been City's man of the match, because he was so effective, got in behind Renan Lodi so often. Guardiola said after the game that he's lacking a bit of composure, a bit of pause, or a bit of rhythm, which is understandable because he's not played for 7 games, or he's only come off the bench in the last couple. So yeah, having Foden back, having pretty much everybody back from the World Cup in some sort of form has to be a positive. And yeah, if you're going to drop points, that's kind of the way you want to do it, I think, because the chances were there, the performances were there, and 9 times out of 10 you're going to win that game comfortably.
I think, as we kind of touched on last week in the kind of previewing this match, Forest have kind of made a real fortress of the City ground. I think it's now 8 games without defeat there, and that, I think you've pointed out Chelsea didn't win there, Tottenham didn't win there. Was it like Everton, West Ham, I think, as well? Liverpool, of course, haven't won there. So it's by no means been, especially after the first couple of months of the season, it's not been an easy place for any team to go. And the fact that City could have won so comfortably, obviously, is annoying, is grating, is a big missed opportunity, which we'll kind of touch on. But on the grand scheme of things, it isn't a total disaster. But we have to kind of do look at those missed chances. I mean, the first half, it felt more of a typical City display where they've got all the ball and not really fashioning many openings. I think they only had the first of Rodri's 3 headers that he kind of put wide after a good De Bruyne ball. But otherwise, they weren't making an awful lot of kind of real clear-cut opportunities in the first half. I think Haaland may have had one. But otherwise, it took Bernardo whacking one in from 20 yards out, and what a great goal it was. A real, almost kind of strange how he deceived Navas in a way. He kind of like went. It felt like it was kind of going down his kind of throat sort of thing, and then just spooned up. So it was a really great goal to deceive a goalkeeper that great. And as Sai pointed out before the game on Twitter, I believe 3 of Forest's back 5 played against City in the Champions League last season. With Felipe and Lodi from Atletico Madrid, and obviously Navas at PSG. So there's a lot of calibre there in that Forest back line. But then in the second half, City did start cutting them open. They made lots of chances, and as you say, the Foden one was kind of horrible because Gundogan put him through so perfectly with that awesomely weighted ball, and he just kind of got caught between 2 minds. It was almost as if, I know I should pass to Haaland here, this is what Haaland's here for, to stick it in, but also I can shoot, and then he just got stuck. I think he had like one dodgy touch, kind of came off his shin a little bit, and he managed to get a defender back. But aside from that, you got Laporte heading the ball, of all places, right into Keylor Navas's gonads. What a save that was, but I think he was a little bit worse for wear after it. Another free header from Rodri. De Bruyne dragged a few shots wide, and then of course the day of both chances, of all his missed chances, was Erling Haaland, who in quick succession hit the crossbar from one rebound, and then somehow after taking a touch absolutely skied it from around 6 yards out. you can almost. I kind of think I'm actually a bit sympathetic. Now I've seen it obviously I couldn't see it in action. With this game not being on telly, but since I haven't seen it since, I kind of have a little bit more sympathy. It wasn't quite the open net I was picturing from what I described. I know he should have scored. Don't get me blooming wrong. Like he should be eating them all day for his breakfast. But to sky it over, I think it was kind of like there was a defender on him, leaning back, comes at him quick, kind of has to take an awkward touch on his pelvis. I can kind of be a bit more forgiving of it, but of course he should absolutely be scoring that. And I think that was the moment when we all thought, well, this is only going in one direction now.
Well, it came after 2 minutes after Haaland was through on goal, and he was played through. He got the other side of Joe Worrell, and you thought, right, if he doesn't score, he'll at least find the target, because obviously Keylor Navas is a good goalkeeper, and he throws himself to the ground. And yes, there's a little tug on the shoulder from Worrell, but I don't think it's enough for him to go down. He was screaming for a penalty. Guardiola's running on the pitch and then into the face of the fourth official to earn himself a booking. But I think the referee's got it spot on, because it wasn't enough to bring him down. He should have had a shot, and he could have put City ahead. And then 2 minutes later, he's got that shot that, Phil Foden has an effort. Navas spills it. The first one hits the bar. It's a bit unlucky. And the second one, I'm gonna disagree with you a bit. Just because of the high standards that Haaland has set himself, he can score those, and he knows how to finish under pressure. And the fact that he's taken a touch, I think he's got to be finding the target again. And yeah, I think those 2 minutes were the moment where you realise it's not happening for City today, is it?
I think he snatched it a bit. I think
yeah.
If he had that chance again, I don't think he'd have kind of whacked it in for the top corner.
Yeah.
I know the kind of goal, his kind of route to goal was a bit crowded. I think there was like 3 players around him, and it felt like he needed to kind of loft it into like the top corner, kind of a similar area to where Bernardo put his. But I think if he was a bit more composed, if the game wasn't in the situation it was, and he had a bit more, like a fraction more time, I have a feeling he might have tried dummying it and kind of acting like he was going to absolutely smash it and then place it in a bottom corner sort of thing. It just felt like he snatched it sort of thing. And I'm just like, a striker of that calibre, who we know how good he is, you want him to be scoring those in that moment. And I'm not saying absolutely anything else, but I can understand it a little bit more. But it's like they say you kind of bring up the penalty incident there. Obviously, I was listening to this on radio commentary, and the commentator, I think Alistair Mann, did believe that the referee was actually going over to VAR as he was marching over to Pep Guardiola to offer that booking. And it's like it felt like it was going to be given, but I believe the commentator said it was actually technically not actually in the box, and that's why VAR couldn't even go back to, theoretically, if he had dragged him down, give him, I don't know if it was or if it wasn't, but because it was out the box, he couldn't go back anyway to maybe give a red card if he's brought him down when he's going through.
Potentially, and Guardiola's argument after the game, he accepted that the booking was absolutely fair, and it was because he was shouting in everybody's face. But Guardiola said, why would Haaland go down in that situation? And I understand that, but I just think Haaland was looking for that contact. He felt it and he thought, I'll go down. And I don't know, like, Haaland's a confident guy. He scored a lot of goals. Surely he's confident enough to go on and have a shot on that effort. But whether that was playing on his mind a couple of minutes later with those rebounds, whether he was trying to smash something in the back of the net with a bit of frustration in his mind, I've got no idea. But I don't think it's going to be a lasting issue with Erling Haaland. If he goes and scores a hat-trick against RB Leipzig, no one's going to be surprised, are they?
Well, I suppose the biggest positive from the match is that we're not coming out of it having the same old tide debate about, does Haaland make City worse? Or that hasn't even come up at all, because he was so involved. He had good chances. He was there on hand. If Foden had passed it a little bit sooner, he was he's going through on Worrell, giving him a nightmare. He had the 2 great chances. He was active. He was involved in the game. So it's not as if we're coming out of the match again thinking, blimmin' heck, we need to solve this issue because Haaland isn't getting the ball. Similar to the previous games, the Villa and the Arsenal match, he was involved, he was in the game, this felt like, it's annoying in the grand scheme of things, as we'll get onto, about them not being able to gain that momentum, as Si was saying last week, and they're not being able to get these 10, 12, 15 game winning streaks on, but it felt more like this time it was one of those things, kind of like the Spurs match where Spurs is just a curse. It was an aberration rather than a trend of City playing poorly and not being themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the reaction of the players. Like Kyle Walker came off and said it was unacceptable, and we've got to be beating teams like this, and that is absolutely true. But if you look at the game in isolation, then you can see exactly where it's gone wrong. City had more than enough chances to win the game. The finishing was for some reason collectively off radar, and Nottingham Forest game plan was brilliant. Steve Cooper said after the game that they had to sort of sacrifice how they usually play, place a lot of players back in defence, sort of condense the middle area, and when they do break on their right and City's left. And I think Match of the Day showed that heat map, which basically had the majority of Nottingham Forest's sort of movement in their own box, and then one little bit on their right hand side, and that's how the goal came about. And it shows that they targeted Bernardo Silva. The goals, when you look at it back, it was a really good goal. They built from the back. They moved it over to the left-hand side. Apparently, every single Nottingham Forest player touched the ball in the move. They did what City do to so many teams, which is create the overload on one side, move it over to the right. Bernardo rushes out, easy played past easily. Aymeric Laporte tries to cover. He's played a 1-2 around. Rodri then comes to cover. And by that time, Morgan Gibbs-White is in the area and squaring it to Chris Wood. So I think you've just got to put it down to an off day for City, and the opposition had a pretty good game plan, got a bit of luck, got a lot of luck with the missed chances, and just move on. I did write this week about, when we're talking about Haaland, is that yes, he missed, yes, he will go on and score a lot of goals, but there's a little bit of a trend creeping in that when Haaland plays and doesn't score for City don't score and they struggle to win. So when Haaland scores, City have never lost. They've got like an 84% win rate, as you would expect, and their goals per game is about 3.2. Now Haaland scores most of those because he scores a lot of goals. But when Haaland plays and doesn't score, like he did in this game and a couple of others, City don't really have a plan B. They don't have another one. The goals per game is about 1.1, so they're only scoring once per game when Haaland's there, and other players are having to sort of pick up that slack if he's just not on it. And the win percentage, I think, is just 33%, which is a little bit concerning. Now, when Haaland doesn't play, City's win percentage shoots back up to 80%. So they know how to play without him when he's not there, but when he's there and it's not working, Nottingham Forest game is such it sums up this sort of conundrum in one. They've not really got an ability to find those goals elsewhere. Now that'll come. He's only been there 7 months, 8 months, so that will come where those other goals will sort of flow from other areas of the pitch. But I was a bit sort of taken aback when I looked at those stats and just how striking it is that when Haaland doesn't score, neither does City.
That is quite interesting. Actually, I didn't think about it, because the first thing I kind of went to was like that Bournemouth game, which he didn't score in, but set one up and was like brilliant, and they won 4-0. I know that's against Bournemouth, but I never really considered that. But I kind of think I'm going to. You say that there's no plan B, then I go back to that Arsenal game where he didn't score until the third goal, and then, as you know, it might have been different had he not scored, etc. But they were already winning 2-1 without him scoring. So I wonder if the numbers maybe obviously squiffed a little bit because of that. You know, as
Absolutely.
I say, Haaland might not have scored and then Arsenal might have equalised, so obviously it was important he scored. I'm not saying that. But like the plan B thing, I was kind of, as you said that, I was kind of like thinking about it. It's like last season on the season, it's kind of what they've always been called for, not having a plan B. Like even when they didn't, the point was when they didn't have a striker was, they don't have a plan B. They don't have anyone they can just kick it up to, as if Guardiola would ever kind of endorse that. To that sort of simplicity. They've never, when they had the false nines there, that was kind of the Guardiola tends to stick to he picks his formation for the game and he tends to stick to it. But then I was thinking, the Arsenal game, he actually switched it, didn't he? He brought Akanji on for Mahrez, and that's what kind of changed the game completely into City's favour. So I do think it's interesting. I can understand how it can be a concern, especially if he's not scoring. And we'll see more in these as the games start to get more important. I wonder if it's more of a psychological thing of, if he's not doing it. I think Barcelona kind of had the same thing at times, like because they've now got like a focal point and a talisman, which they've never had before. It's like to this degree, you can kind of look to him to do something, and you try and if he's not, you kind of. It's easy for players. I'm not saying City could do this, But it can be easy for some players to give all responsibility to the star man, and if he's the one who doesn't perform, as we've seen, all the kind of blame tends to land on their shoulders. And I'm not saying City themselves are doing that, but I think it's like almost a subconscious thing that happens. Barcelona used to do it all the time in their kind of rough patch a few years ago when it was just Messi basically dragging them through. That's what they'd do. They just give it to him, and he obviously would do absolutely something just outlandish, and they'd win. But when he doesn't, they've kind of have nothing else. And I can see how that, maybe not tactically, because I think Guardiola has shown there's a plan B there. And as you rightly say there, when he's not been playing this year and he's been injured, they've managed to cope without him because they've coped without a main striker for the last 2 years anyway. But I do wonder if it's like a psychological thing where they think, oh, if he can't even score them, how am I going to score them, sort of thing. And then maybe that's how it'll work in like kind of a one-off instance like this one where it just felt, I think everyone felt, and if we're all feeling it, I imagine the players on the pitch felt the exact same way, where it's just like, oh, blimmin' heck, we're here again, we're just not going to, obviously they'd already scored, but we're just not going to get that decisive goal today.
Yeah, it's one of those, the stats don't look good, but then you could probably look at all those games where he hasn't scored, like we've been talking about the Forest game. City should have been out of sight. City should have added 3 or 4 goals to that tally without Haaland. As you say, the Arsenal game, on sort of the other side of the stats, also shows that City are fine without him. And yeah, it's one of those sort of metrics that will be used by people who have a sort of preconceived argument, which is City are worse with Haaland. But it does feel like it might be a mentality thing, exactly like you say, where if Haaland isn't sort of on form or firing, then things sort of seep through to other players. But yeah, I don't have an answer. I just looked at those stats and I thought that's quite interesting.
No, it definitely is, and it could be a problem. Again, I think it's more one to watch how it kind of plays out, because I could see it being a problem in these big Champions League games that we're going to get. Obviously, we'll talk about the Champions League coming back soon. Presuming City get past Leipzig, not to dismiss Leipzig at all, they've got a lot of good players, but when you get your Madrids or your, I nearly said Barcelona then, but of course they're not in it, but when you get your Bayerns or your PSGs or your Real Madrids and Liverpools and whatnot, the pressure is so much more intense. The kind of missed chances can have even more of a knock-on effect, and I do wonder if it'll come into play a bit more, where if Haaland's having an off day in a match like that, which obviously would open a whole of a can of worms, considering that was the reason he was bought, etc. and so on. I could see it maybe affecting the team in that way, but I'm not sure if it is. I think the debate was more pertinent, like, we've called it a tired debate and a boring debate, but I think it was kind of an honest one and a needed one after like that Tottenham game when he barely touched the ball. I think he literally didn't touch it in the box, did he? And he didn't have a touch, and like 23 touches all game. I think it was the United match that they lost. He had 23 touches when in the United game at Old Trafford last season, which City won 2-0, but they absolutely dominated them, and it was almost as if they took pity on them to not win by 4 or 5. I think that the player with the least touches in that game was 70. So it's clear that there was an issue of Guardiola wanting control of the game, and he needed 11 players to be on the ball to do that. And if Haaland isn't on the ball as much, and it's not to say he's a Neanderthal who can't trap a ball and make a nice pass, that's obviously not the case whatsoever. But if he's not on the ball as much because he's not coming deep for the ball, he's always trying to make these runs. City are trying to do what they did so well last year in controlling games with one less player, and obviously that's a lot more difficult. So I do think it was a honest debate, but it seems to me, even though they've drawn this one, and form still might be a bit ropey, I do feel like the question of Haaland being involved and how to best utilise him has been addressed somewhat. And City, even though they've dropped points, they were really, they were good. And any other day they win by 6. Like it felt like one of those. It felt like one of those rather than a crisis point.
Yeah, and that's why Guardiola was so calm after the game. And as we've said, if City are creating chances, he's not as bothered, and he accepts that can happen in football. I also think with Haaland, he had probably had his best all-round game at Arsenal only a couple of days before. He was involved in the build-up, he scored a goal, he was stretching the defence out. I think Felipe, the Forest defender, who is another one who shouldn't be at Nottingham Forest, with all respect to them, he was saying that he basically went man-to-man on Haaland and didn't give him a second all game, and you saw that because he kept having to come wide to the left-back area to try and get the ball, and that moved him out of the box, and maybe he was getting frustrated for that. You've got to look at each game in isolation to wonder why he's not scoring. It probably was just one of those days where he wasn't going to score, and he'll go back to Germany this week and probably put in one of his better performances again, and we'll forget all about it.
And yeah, let's be honest, like any other striker doesn't score in one game. We're not having these massive kind of autopsies on why he's not done it. It's just because his standards are so incredibly high that any slight aberration or slight dip below that standard is seen as something that needs investigating, when it's simply not the case. I don't think we ever went into matches years ago when Aguero might not have scored, and Aguero probably went 3 or 4, 5, 6, however many matches without scoring. But Aguero was a world-class elite level striker. But he's just, the numbers on Haaland's are just on another level, almost like the Messi and kind of Ronaldo scale, where they broke the scale, so anything else that is really, really amazing just doesn't seem as good. So when Haaland just has the temerity to miss one absolute sitter and just not get on the score sheet once, it feels like there needs to be some great grander kind of discussion about it. But the fact is, everyone has slightly off days, and as you say, Wednesday he'll probably go and bang 3 in and get us all shut up again, and we'll be marvelling about his excellence. He's still got 14 games to break that record. I'd be flabbergasted if he didn't do it, so only time will tell. But let's talk about that equalising goal. As you say, Chris Wood at the back post. You wrote an interesting piece about it, so kind of comparing it to how it's a goal City would be really proud of, almost a trademark City goal, if anything.
Yeah, as I said before, it was sort of a flowing move, a 20-odd pass move, created an overload, and then sort of ruthlessly picked off City's weakness. And it came from the game plan that Steve Cooper was talking about. He said that he targeted the left area. He didn't name Bernardo in particular, but the fact that Bernardo was going backwards and forwards between that left back area, there was space there, and because it's not a completely ingrained tactic yet, it is still a bit new, then it seemed like not only Bernardo, but Laporte and Rodri also were a little bit unsure of what to do. And yeah, that's what happens when you miss all your chances, that one shot on target can prove costly. And in light of that, I saw quite a few tweets blaming Ederson, just that he'd conceded another shot on target on his only shot on target, and it had cost City. Now, Ederson couldn't have done anything about that goal, and a stat that I keep seeing is that he's conceded his last 4 shots on target, or the first shot on target in the last 4 games. One of those was a penalty. One of those was a one-on-one that should never have got to him, because I think Bernardo gave the ball away in midfield. And I can't remember the other one, but it also wasn't his fault. It was the Harry Kane one at Tottenham, where another mistake got Harry Kane in front of goal, and no one was stopping Harry Kane from breaking that record. So I didn't really buy that. But when I asked the question on Twitter about Ederson, I think it's just gone under my radar, but it seems like there's a lot of strongly held opinions about his shot stopping ability, and most of the time the fact that it's becoming an increasing trend that when City do miss these opportunities and the opposition has one shot on target, it is going in and it is proving costly. So it seems like there's a bit of simmering unhappiness with Ederson, and different stats have been pointed out. He's got the second lowest save percentage, even though he's faced the lowest shots of the league. That's not great. I don't think anyone can argue with that. I think some of the stats aren't great, but personally, when you look at what he brings to the team, the build-up, he saves far more goals than he will let in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Now, you can't, I think some of the, as you say, the goals conceded in the recent games and stuff, you can't just take those numbers and be like, he's clearly rubbish. I mean, as you say, he couldn't do nothing, unless you want him to be Stretch Armstrong and get from one side of post to other in a millisecond. There's nothing he can do about the Forest equaliser. Penalty, here or there, mistakes that have cost him, like the not the Fernandes one, I should say, against United when I go to, we defended him to the hilt because he was set for Rashford to score, etc. and so on. Like, I think off the top of my head, I can't remember mistakes he's made off the top of my head in saving shots. But I actually think more of mistakes he's made in recent time. He's coming out of his goal too quickly and nearly getting caught out, not actually conceded from it yet, I don't think.
Giving the ball away.
Or giving the ball away.
Yeah.
But that's what happens. Every outfielder loses the ball every now and then, and when Ederson's basically playing as an outfielder, he's going to lose the ball every now and then. It's the risk, and I think Guardiola said umpteenth times, it's the risk. We know it's a risk because he has done it before in seasons gone by and stuff, and Guardiola's always said, this is how we play, mistakes happen, we know Eddie's quality. He's made a mistake there. We're not going to blame him for it. We move on, etc. and so on. Like it does baffle me. Maybe he's not the best shot stopper. I still think he's pretty bloody good. But you can't argue that the stats of him being the lowest with the lowest shots. Maybe you can't really argue too much with that. You maybe have to look at it and be like, maybe he needs to do a bit of work on his concentration. What it seems like, I think there's the different goalkeepers where a goalkeeper at a lower league club. I was going to say Nick Pope, then probably a bad example in recent times, but you can be at Burnley, let's say, and you face loads of shots and you look really good, but then you take Nick Pope and put him into the England team and he doesn't look as good because he's not as active as often, and he's got to be on the ball. He's probably not as good on the ball, and he's been brilliant for Newcastle, sending off at the weekend aside. He's been really good. That's not to disparage Pope precisely, but just that example. It's different goalkeepers. It's just not one. It's just not a one size fits all thing. You've got different goalkeepers for different clubs. I don't think, as an example, maybe if you put Ederson in Burnley or Nottingham Forest,
I would
who
love
are conceding
to see that.
Well, if you put him in Nottingham Forest, who are conceding 26 shots, maybe he doesn't make all the saves. But as you just rightly said, it's not as if every save he makes can be counted as a save because it's not technically a shot on him. The way City can play so higher up because they can rely on him to be basically the last line of defence, 18, 20, 30 yards from his goal. They can push so much higher. The way he kind of anticipates danger, I know I kind of complained to him for sometimes. He does make mistakes running out a bit harshly, a bit rashly. But most of the time he gets it bob on and cuts out danger before it even kind of really becomes an actual danger. Like, that's the risk you play. And it maybe, City fans obviously have watched him week in, week out more than me. Probably see a bit more mistakes and probably a bit more, resentment. But I don't tell me who you replace him with if that's the issue, because I don't know another keeper on planet Earth as good. Maybe Andre Ter Stegen, but he's not leaving anytime soon. Neuer not leaving anytime soon. You're talking the absolute pinnacle of goalkeepers who are even remotely as close at doing what Ederson can do, and. Yeah, I don't know. Just chill out a little bit, I think, because he's pretty good, I think.
The impression I got, and I got a lot of replies, it was really interesting when I threw it out to Twitter, and it seems like, on one hand, it's a bit of a worry that he makes some sort of rash mistakes or he doesn't always create the big saves, and the Champions League is coming up. You can get away with it over the course of a Premier League season, but in individual games like the Champions League, you need your goalkeeper to make big saves. And it was pointed out a few times that both De Gea and Alisson at the weekend made match-winning saves for their sides while the game was still level, and then their side went on to win the game. I think it's levelled at Ederson that he doesn't always create those sort of big sort of hero saves. But again, I would argue that his sort of contribution to the build-up and his calmness under pressure sort of offsets that. And he made the mistake against Tottenham earlier in the home game last month, and he said, "I'm sorry, but I'm going to continue playing as I am because no risk, no reward." And I think that's the attitude of Guardiola as well, who's called him a perfect goalkeeper. And now there's a lot of people calling for Stefan Ortega to get a go. The performance against Chelsea in the League Cup was one of the best goalkeeping performances I've seen in a long time, and I think that has been seen at the Etihad in a long time. But then at Southampton, a lot of people would have preferred Ederson in goal because Ortega wasn't great. I think Ortega is probably capable of making more of those sort of camera saves, those headline saves, but in the build-up, and we saw it against Arsenal in the FA Cup, he doesn't quite have that sort of ability to pass out from the back. So every goal kick went long. City were then sort of chasing second balls rather than being in control at the back. It's not, for me, as simple as just bringing in Ortega and having a go. Now Ortega will get a go next week in the FA Cup. Maybe he has a good game and changes Pep Guardiola's mind, but I can't see anything other than Ederson being the main goalkeeper for the rest of the season, because he is so important to City, and they accept that he might make some mistakes. The Aston Villa goal, okay, could he have stretched his arm out a bit more? Was it a little bit, weak, if you like? That's, I think, what City fans want more. But no, I think I'd underestimated the criticism among the fan base for a player that I thought was just regarded as one of the best goalkeepers in the league, and everyone thought that, but clearly they don't.
Yeah, me too. I think it's a strange one. Like Ortega, as you say, I think it might be a little bit of the case of kind of the heart grows fonder with absence makes the heart grow fonder sort of thing. Because I think you're right. Like Chelsea, amazing, really good. It's like, oh, City. I think we said on this podcast, City may have got themselves one of the best kind of backup keepers in the league here. He looks really good. It's good to have competition to push Ederson. Perhaps he'd gone a little complacent. I think that's a fair point. And maybe dropping him for one match, an important match, whoever costly, might be the good message to say, listen, your spot's not completely secure. You need to be on it all the time, as does everyone. You know, no one's spot is completely safe. But I do think what you're right there. The Southampton match, he was not good. He was kind of a liability at times on the ball, if I recall correctly. I couldn't actually remember the match, but I could remember distinctly Ortega kind of rushing out of his goal and it looking quite like Claudio Bravo had kind of returned to the club. So, you know, the grass isn't always green, I'd say, and I think what you said there was very absolutely spot on. Exactly what I was thinking. Is camera save that hero save, match winning save. You can quite easily just kind of swap it to camera save as well. Now De Gea, as you pointed out there, was absolutely incredible in that game against Leicester City. Kept United in the first half. Kept United in the match in that first half. But the fact is, City rarely, if ever, concede the amount of chances United were doing in that first half, and there isn't as much a need as a shot stopper. I imagine if you swap De Gea in, that's a good kind of exercise as what we were saying earlier. If you swap De Gea and Ederson, I think both of them in the other teams are going to absolutely struggle. De Gea can't pass that well with his feet, awful distribution, but he's a really good shot stopper. Maybe, so City are not going to be able to play as well as they were, and maybe he'll make some good saves, crucial, but I'd imagine they'd concede more because the way they'd play would have to change. You put Ederson in that United team, yeah, maybe United press a bit higher. It'd be actually quite funny if United were miles better with Ederson. But I imagine in kind of how they are at the minute, with how kind of overrun they were in that first half and how many chances they conceded, all likelihood is Ederson doesn't make the saves De Gea does. That's fair enough. But it's as I said earlier, it's more than just the saves, I think, now. And maybe you can just say, no, a goalkeeper's job is to save the goals, and you know. On the tin, that is the case, but it's so much more than that now. And how City play for the last 6 years, 5, isn't it, since he signed, has been kind of, they wouldn't have been able to do everything they've done without a goalkeeper like Ederson doing what he does. And maybe he's in a rough patch, maybe will prove to cost him, maybe he won't be able to make the big save. But as I say, I don't think there's a need for Ederson to make those big saves as much, because the way he kind of helps the team defend means they don't have as many chances on their goal. And I say, Forest match, there was one shot on target. It was from 3 yards out, from a well-worked goal. It wasn't as if he made a mistake or anything. And I don't know. I felt, as I said there, if you tell me one goalkeeper, and maybe they have in Ortega, maybe they have, I doubt it, but if you could tell me a keeper they can get in or can replace him with, I'll tell you one, Jamie Trafford, awesome. Bolton number one. Hopefully he doesn't make. Hopefully they don't replace him with him, because I want him back at Bolton forever, because he's absolutely mint. So there's your one. Other than that, I do not know. But kind of moving on. It was a disappointing result for City, as we say. They remain inconsistent, and the kind of the issue is, the annoying thing is that they didn't take it. Kind of build on last week. Obviously, a massive galvanising victory over Arsenal, and they didn't manage to take advantage of it. And, it's what Si was talking about last week, what we was all talking about last week. That momentum, that winning streak, they're not being able to find it. And that is the worry kind of now, as the Champions League's coming back, as the FA Cup's coming back. We are getting into crunch time now, and if City can't kind of get a run together, there could be some issues.
Yeah, well, they had the title race back in their hands. It looked like Arsenal were going to sort of drop off a little bit. They were struggling at Aston Villa in the early kickoff. We were all watching it as City were warming up at the City ground, and it felt like it was going to be City's day. But Arsenal scored those 2 late goals, and then City can't back it up, and suddenly they're 2 points behind again, and Arsenal had that game in hand. So yes, Arsenal do have to come back to the Etihad in April, I believe, but it's now out of City's hands again. I think they've got to stop talking about this winning run. I know that's what everyone knows they've got to do, but every time you hear a player or a manager come out and say we need to have a winning run, they can't back it up. Now, performances have probably been consistent recently, I'd say, apart from the Tottenham game. They've been fairly good, so the performances stay the same. That's what Guardiola will be looking for, but results-wise, I think if you focus too much on those winning runs rather than just let them happen, that's not the way to do it. City have got the success in recent years by going on some runs and just focusing on the next game. Suddenly, they're now talking about 10 games in the future, and that's not going to work. Look at what's made you successful in the past. Don't look at the end goal and then go from there. It's an interesting one, but I think we just. From a neutral point of view, seeing City and Arsenal go at it and change hands, it's very, very interesting to watch. But from City's point of view, it must be frustrating to take one step forward and then another back.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not as if it's just us, the press and fans talking about the runs. I think Kyle Walker's got a record saying a few times,
yeah,
we need to do this run. And I don't know if it's going to be possible this year, but I don't think it's going to necessarily be necessary this year, because I think we talked about last week. It could be a topsy-turvy instead of it being the like the Liverpool City classics we've had in recent years, where it was. I think it's hard to call it boring because the football was so staggeringly good, and the level of both teams to push each other all the way to win every match from like February or whatever it was kind of never seen before, literally. But it was a bit. There was no drama in it, was there? There was no twist. There was no turns. Whereas this year, it feels like there's going to be, and we saw that on the day's early kickoff. And I do wonder if the kind of the method of Arsenal's win, the galvanising nature of it, perhaps maybe had an effect on City. In some cases, they probably went out for the warm-ups with Arsenal kind of dropping points and came back to them winning. But what a game it was in that early kickoff. Arsenal twice going behind to Aston Villa, and it certainly looked like at one point, like as we kind of discussed last week, that this wobble could be continuing, and they needed to come back, and they did so in really great circumstances, kind of funny circumstances, as Jorginho's shot cannoned off the bar and onto Emi Martinez's head. We wondered last week if the former Arsenal party at Aston Villa could kind of conspire to cost them, and it ended up doing the exact opposite. A really seismic dose of karma coming Martinez's way after his hilarious antics at the World Cup and afterwards. And then they ended up winning 4-2. Martinez again caught out as he went up for a corner. So they're now back ahead with 2-point lead, and they've got the advantage now, and they still have a game in hand, of course, to come, I think, later on this month against Everton. It might actually be next month at this point.
It's next week.
Oh, is it really? You know more than me. So that'll be very interesting. We'll see where we lie once they play Everton, I suppose, and that we'll get a much better kind of lay of the land. But even if they win that, it just feels more like there's going to be so many more twists and turns before the season comes out at this point.
Yeah, and I think if City are not at their best, which they've not been this season, especially over sort of 5-10 game runs of form, then that probably suits City. If they win the title this season, it's probably going to be their worst of the lot, but a title win is a title win, and City have just
if anything
got to beat
better
the opponent
for the fight.
Well, yeah,
you know what I mean.
So,
not because of the quality, but
yeah.
to do it with such spirit, I'd find it almost a bit more admirable in a way. To win it when you're not at your best.
The fact that City are still in touch after playing as they have done, and I say that in comparing them to how they have been in recent years. I think if you put this City side in previous seasons against the City and Liverpool side, hypothetically, they'd be so far back, but they're still there. They're still in there, and they can, if they can just keep in touch with Arsenal, they're probably going to have to beat them at the Etihad now, and then hope for a slip up and take advantage. Come the end of the season, Guardiola keeps saying, let's get to the last 8 games. That's when you can probably see City, really sort of using their experience, but they've got to get to those last 10 games within touching distance.
Yeah, I think what we all want as neutrals is kind of, by the time that game comes around in April, for it to all be on the line, for neither team to be, well, I'm sure City fans don't want this, but I'm not a City fan. We want both teams to be within touching distance of each other when that match comes around, and for it to be the kind of the big battle, the winner takes all sort of thing that we could see it being. And
yeah,
there's a long way to go until then, but you kind of get the feeling now that, and even we can't kind of keep out of mind, United are creeping up. They did win again themselves in sort of adversity over the weekend. They're only 3 points off City, is it, and 5 off Arsenal. They're in there, and they keep going the way they are. It could be a 3-horse race, and City fans might not want to hear it, but for kind of everyone else, it looks set to be a really exciting end to a Premier League season, which we haven't had for a fair few years now. Like, as in, just the drama and not really knowing where the title's going to go.
Yeah, and that can only help City. I think Guardiola before the weekend's game said there was about 6 or 7 teams who could still win. He obviously named City, Arsenal. He said United are there, Newcastle are there, and he even went as far as saying Brighton are. Yeah. Well, he didn't say Fulham, but he said Brighton, and then Fulham went and beat Brighton, and also Newcastle went and lost. But he's looking behind his shoulder as well as in front of him. That is for sure.
No, it's certainly going to be an interesting one. But, of course, our attentions will kind of turn away from the Premier League this week and towards the Champions League instead, because the competition got back underway last week. There's a big match tonight on Tuesday with Liverpool facing off against Real Madrid. And, of course, on Wednesday, City travel to the Bundesliga side RB Leipzig for their last 16 clash. RB Leipzig won 3-0 at the weekend over Wolfsburg, so going through the game in a bit better shape and a bit more confidence than City, especially as City are without Aymeric Laporte and Kevin De Bruyne, who didn't train on Tuesday and haven't made the trip with the rest of the 22-man squad in their stead. You've got a couple of youngsters in Charles and Robertson going instead. John Stones also still not available. How are we thinking, Joe? Like, big losses there, Laporte and De Bruyne. Maybe two players who aren't exactly in the greatest of form, but big players, big leaders, intrinsic to how City play. How do they go about replacing them?
Well, that's it. They are two players who haven't been sort of consistently in the team in the last few weeks. De Bruyne's been dropped a couple of times. Laporte's been sort of out of favour a little bit and moved from left back to centre back. But they are two players who know how City play. They've played in Champions League semi-finals and finals and know how to get there. And these are the kind of games, these sort of first legs in sort of tricky games where you're expected to win, but there's no guarantees, where you need your experienced players. And they're two players who probably would have been on the team sheet if they were available. We're recording this before Guardiola's press conference in Leipzig, so we'll find out why they are missing, and City will hope it's not a long-term thing. If it's just a precaution, then that would be better than sort of any more long-term absences. But in the place, I think it lends itself. If they weren't going to do it already, I think it lends a return to a back four without Bernardo Silva in it. In terms of Nathan Ake at left back, you're now restricted to Diaz and Akanji at centre back, but that's not a bad pairing at all. Walker at right back, and then Bernardo can move into midfield where Kevin De Bruyne was, or like Guardiola has done in the last 2 games where he's dropped Kevin De Bruyne in the 2 games against Tottenham. He's brought in Julian Alvarez, and he said he wants more players in the box. He wants more bodies in the box rather than people crossing it in there. So could Julian Alvarez replace De Bruyne and maybe a similar system? That would be the only way I could see Bernardo staying in that left back role. But I think of all the times to have those two missing, this is probably one of the better times, even if you're sacrificing a bit of that experience, which would have been so useful.
Yeah, definitely. I can see Alvarez coming back in, as you say. I think, not to make kind of sweeping generalisations, but that's exactly what I'm going to do. We kind of know that Bundesliga teams play in a certain way of, Dortmund surprised us last year in the group stages, so of course it may change. I don't think any of us predicted how defensive they'd go, and very nearly got a result out of it. Made life really hard for City. But Leipzig, as Bundesliga teams tend to do, they like to get on the ball, attack with pace, and they tend to be quite frail defensively. So I can see a world where Alvarez comes in, and maybe get this maybe return to kind of the 4-4-2, perhaps. Given De Bruyne is injured, and you just go Rodri and Gundogan in the middle. Obviously, Foden or Mahrez by Grealish, I'd imagine, start, and you go Alvarez and Haaland, try and kind of overload Leipzig a little bit and get them. They've got on paper some great defenders. The star of the World Cup in Gvardiol, Orban, David Raum was a left back City were linked with. I don't know if that was ever anything actual in it, but they've needed a left back for years, and he was one who's pretty good, pretty talented. He's there, and Klosterman at right back. They've got a decent defence, a good goalkeeper, so it's not like it should be easy, but they tend to kind of push up, be attacking. I could see a world where Alvarez and Haaland together, kind of working in tandem, can cause some real damage. And I do wonder, though, instead of Ake at left back, who's done really well there, I do wonder if it might be a call for a tad more pace and natural kind of full back width. And I do wonder if Rico Lewis could maybe come in to have Ake in centre back and Diaz at right, if he wants kind of left footed and right footed there in the heart of defence.
Yeah, and that's what Laporte's absence does. It means that you've probably got to play 2 right-footed centre-backs if you're going to use Ake as the left-back. Lewis is an option. He's not played for the last few games. I mean, when he's been thrown into any big game against any big winger, he's done very well and rarely been caught out. And he's got players like Salah, and he's kept them quiet. I would look at Szoboszlai, if I've said that right, for Leipzig, and think he could be one of those sort of tricky ones who gives Rico Lewis quite a tough time. Maybe Nathan Ake is just a bit more solid, because I think if City come back with a draw and bring it to the Etihad, they'd be relatively happy with that, because they have the chance to win it at home. They don't always win these games in the first leg, and having that second leg at home will help them. So I can't see Guardiola taking too many risks, and maybe Rico Lewis is a bit of a risk, especially when you've got a couple of your more experienced players not there.
Well, yeah, I think the biggest threat you see with Leipzig when you look at their team is they've got a lot of kind of good, fast attackers. You look at the two wingers who started on Saturday. You got Timo Werner, of course, who was kind of concerned in the past with his kind of rapid pace, even though he remains a bit of a loose cannon in front of goal. Obviously, as you say, I'm not even going to try and give it a go because I don't want to butcher it worse than you did. But of course, you've got the Hungarian lad, is what I'll go with. Emil Forsberg, who's really good on the ball. And then Christopher Nkunku's back from his injury. So they've got a lot, and Andre Silva, of course, leading the line. They've got a lot of good attacking pedigree there. I agree with you. I think we can all agree, if nothing else, that he surprised us with Bernardo playing left back at the weekend. I wager I don't think we kind of saw it after the Arsenal match, after it was changed. But it was different against Forest when they had more possession. I can imagine City will have most of the possession in this game as well. But the danger of Leipzig on the counter is so much more potent than Forest, and Forest did City kind of with a really nice move. So you don't want to leave yourself exposed to Leipzig's most promising area, I'd wager. So you'd want to go back to basics and at least have a solid back four of defenders who know, intrinsically, I've said that word a few times in this podcast, maybe it's the theme of the show, but knowing the bones how to defend and isn't winging it to an extent like Bernardo.
Yeah, that's why I can see a back four with Ake. I just think the control in that game is what Guardiola will want, and the fact that he doesn't need to win it in this first visit, I think that will play his part. And yes, City have been playing well, but the form's been a bit up and down. He doesn't want to lose this game. Let's say I think it would be far much more of a worry if City were to go behind, because then the pressure's on again and all sorts of questions get asked. If they can get a draw or a tight win, then I think they'd be delighted, I think.
Well, it's set to be an absolutely really entertaining, interesting match on Wednesday, of course. And we'll be back later on this week, no doubt, to talk all about it on the Talking City podcast, of course. But for now, that is the end of this week's episode. If you want to get all the latest news and expert analysis on the game and all the build-up and fallout, of course you know where to go. It's manchestereveningnews.co.uk/Manchester City. You can get all the latest news on our Twitter feed at ManCityMen, and over on Facebook as well, at Manchester Evening News Man City. But of course, that is the end of today's episode, everyone. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back later on next week. But until then, it's goodbye for now. Ta-ra.